Well, hello and welcome to another careers workshop. This is career competitive job applications, a huge topic. Last time I tackled this one, the workshop was pretty long. So today it's going to be a bit of a choose your own adventure. So I'm going to get your feedback on what you would like me to focus on today. For those of you who haven't met me yet, welcome. I'm the HDR career educator. My name is Karen. I've been doing this for about 15, 16 years now in my spare time. And it's one of my favorite things to do to help out some really, really clever people at QUT who are doing their MPhil or their PhD and just need a little bit of a nudge or a helping hand to help them prepare as best they can for this crazy job market that we're in at the moment. So let's begin. First of all, of course, I would like to acknowledge our traditional owners. I'm working from home today, but I am still on Turrbal and Yagara lands, who are the First Nations owners of the lands in which QUT is now standing. Now, we pay respects to their elders, their laws, their customs and creation spirits, and we recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. So I'm hoping that this slide is not new to you. We have made our little suite of skills a bit easier for you to cope with, and there are now 12. So this morning, or this afternoon even, we are in the yellow square, firmly in the yellow up here, obviously looking at career development, but also with everything to do with careers, it's always project management as well. So this is where it fits. For those of you who haven't seen the GRED HDR planning model, this is a little bit of a tool so that you can figure out what to do when. It's one of the most common questions that I get. So from early candidature through the middle, right to the end of your candidature, there's lots of things that we would like to recommend for you. So where does this workshop fit? Well, you can join this workshop anytime you like in your candidature, but actually it's about towards the end. It's job applications workshops right at the end. It doesn't mean that you leave all of your career planning to the end. In fact, my preference is that you do most of it early, but it's never too late. So whatever stage of candidature you are in, you are very welcome. So this is my career planning model. All of my workshops fit inside this model. Next year, I've got some really fun things planned for you. I'm going to be doing a few more maps for you so that you're really clear on what to do when and what that looks like. But in the meantime, we'll work on this. This is our focus on the future today. Oh, goodness, how many slides of these have I got? Right, these are some more details. This will be useful for you when I upload the workshop, but I'm not going to talk you through them today. So let's get going. My goals for today for you is so that you better understand the job application process, that you learn the differences between professional resumes and academic CVs. If you've heard me speak on this before, you'll know it's a real bugbear, a real passion of mine. If you haven't, I'm so glad you're here today so that I can help you learn the differences and to learn the principles behind cover letters and how recruitment works. And because it's a Friday, even though it's not, my polls aren't working. I'm a bit sad about that. Can I just ask you then to either, now we're still a fairly small group, there's only 17 of us here. Please feel free, if you would like to, if you have the bandwidth and you've got the location to, feel free to turn your cameras on and unmute as we can have some discussions. If that's not possible or you prefer not to, then I'm happy for you to use the chat. Hello, Josephine. It's lovely to see your face. Thank you for being a real, at least two-dimensional human today. So what I wanted to know in the poll, so either in the chat or show of hands, are you here for advice on a specific job application that you've got in mind today? So yes, raise your hands.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
I can, Jess. Sorry about that.
Hi. No, that's okay. Hi, Karen. Yeah, so I came from industry before I started my PhD. And I feel pretty confident with an industry CV.
Yeah.
But I am looking to move into academia once my PhD is done. And apparently academic resumes look very different. And so I want to learn today about the differences.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jess. I think you are not alone. Renee said in the chat that they're looking for something similar. And Samir. So, okay, academic CVs. Are most of you intending at this point, at least, to look for work in academia? Show of hands. This is an intention. It doesn't mean this is going to be an outcome, because who knows what happens. But at the moment, this is your plan. Only a couple of hands, actually. Does that mean that most of the rest of you would prefer to work in industry, or as Christina said in the chat, first come, first serves, best job that comes up, you'll be on it. So open to either. Okay, so a few of you are both. All right. Is anyone specifically interested in perhaps a government role or a public service role? It doesn't often come up as its own little category, but there are a few small differences. So I'd be really keen to know if you're keen on that or you just haven't really thought about it. So a couple of you, industry, government, yes. Any and all takers, huh? Perfect. It's nice. It's nice to have some options. And for you, whatever stage of your candidature you're at, if you are open to all of those things, there are a few differences. Let's talk you through them, but it would be really good for you to keep your eyes peeled almost everywhere. So, final question, which would have been much more interesting on a poll or a quiz, but never mind. Would you prefer that we focus today on a resume, a cover letter, selection criteria, or the overview, the whole shebang? Selection criteria. Okay, Renee. Samir says all. Roxana says selection criteria too. Okay, good. This is terrific. Now, I said that was the last question, and it's not. Right, so Jess is pretty happy with her draft so far on cover letters. It is a little bit, because it's free form writing, you're pretty used to that, aren't you? So yeah, it's not quite so tricky. All right, an overview. And I'll focus a little bit on selection criteria. I am happy to do that. One final show of hands. Does anyone have their draft documents, a draft resume, draft cover letter, draft selection criteria with them today for your own benefit? And then potentially, would you be willing to share it with the group for some group learning? The trade-off here is, yes, it's a vulnerable thing to share a document. However, Everything is always in draft unless it's already been sent or about to be sent. So it is, from my perspective at least, a very safe learning environment. And if anyone is happy to do that, and you would prefer that I turned off the recording while we discuss it, I'm very happy to do that. So we share it with this group, but no further. The advantage, of course, is if you are willing to share your documents, guess what? You're going to get some free coaching on your document. All right, so let's kick on then. Thank you very much. That's given me a better idea of where everybody's at and where you'd like me to spend the time today. So that means that there are going to be a few things that I may just whiz past. You will get the recording, I promise. You will get the slides, I promise. So you're not going to miss it. But if we whiz past things like cover letters, you'll have the notes, but we're not going to spend any time on it today because that's what you've asked for. What you need is what you'll get. All right. So I think we've already covered this, haven't we? Why are you attending today? If there's any other secrets that you haven't shared yet, let me know in the chat. But otherwise, I think we can move on. Here was going to be another quiz. Don't you hate it when the laptop fails at the last minute? So, did you know that all of the roles that I've spoken about this morning, in terms of industry roles, government roles, academic roles, and then professional uni roles, did you know that they all tend, it's not gospel, but it is a trend, they use different formats for their job applications. Did you know that? And that's okay. Well, guess what they do? So I've got the formats, or the usual formats, for four different types of roles. Can I get you to add in the chat? It's much more fun if this is a quick quiz, but can I get you to identify the usual format for an academic role? What color is it? Green, red, blue, or yellow?
The blue.
There is something of a clue there, isn't there? Yes, yes. Academic roles will usually ask you for an academic CV, the selection criteria, and the cover letter. So, yep, the whole kitchen sink. It makes them really onerous to do because they're asking you for the most amount of pre-written stuff. However, it usually means that the interview process is pretty effortless and it's just one, maybe two rounds of interviews. So at least it's quick at that end. Now, which of these formats, green, red, blue, or yellow, is usually used for a government role?
Yeah, I also think red.
Some of you aren't quite sure. It is a bit of a guess sometimes, isn't it? It's, again, and it's not 100%. But those of you who guessed red, the resume and the statement of claims, that's usually how government roles work. The way a statement of claims, if you're not sure what a statement of claims is, compared to a cover letter and a selection criteria, it's essentially a smush of the two. So it's a hybrid version. It's where you don't where you start the document off as if it was a cover letter, dear Mrs. Smith, and then you would begin as if it was a cover letter, but within that document, usually a maximum of 2 pages, you would then essentially jam all your evidence that you meet their criteria inside your statement of claims. So that's the government role. What haven't we done? Industry.
You know,
Industry is a bit of a broad brush, so it can depend. But yes, usually with industry roles, it's a little simpler. It's a resume, not an academic CV, but it's a resume and then a cover letter. So it's kind of the opposite to an academic application, in that the academic roles, they make you do all the work up front and not so much work afterwards. With industry roles, they make it pretty quick for you to apply, just a standard resume and a cover letter, but then they are likely to take you around different assessment centers, possibly different quizzes, personality profiles, and potentially multiple rounds of interviews. So it's never quick and easy all the way through. The industry makes it quick to apply, but quite slow to get the role. So we haven't covered, what didn't we cover? Green. So green formats tend to be used for university professional roles. For example, the one that I've got at the moment. My role could be appointed as either an academic role or a professional role, but as a professional, I have to do my resume, my cover letter, and about 15 selection criteria. Universities are the worst for the number of selection criterion that they actually use. I think the most I've ever done is 16, which is a little bit mental. I think the best I've ever done is 7. The shortest I've ever done is 7. So if you were looking for a professional role, and there's quite a lot of interesting ones where graduates with your experience and your behind the scenes knowledge of how the university works, you would be a terrific fit for. If you were ever interested in that, that's where they're going to be. All right. So where do we get started? So I am actually running a brand new workshop next year because I've noticed a gap whenever we talk about job applications and whenever I've done any documentation review, there's a bit of a gap. Usually we find, I find that students find a job that they'd like to apply for. They write the job, they write their application, then they send it to me and go, can you check it? And it's like, right, tell me about your analysis of the job. And they go, what? I'm supposed to do that too? Then tell me about the way you've assessed your skills against their requirements. And again, it's a little bit of a blank slate. And then potentially we don't modify either. So there's a brand new workshop coming next year, which is called You're Not Ready to Write Your Job Application. And it's meant to be, it may not sound it, but it's meant to be encouraging. It's about all of the things that you need to think about and research and prepare your advantage for before you start to write. So today we're kind of going to skim through a little bit of that, but I need you to know there's work to do after you find the job and before you start writing. So this is what I mean. So I'm going to talk you through it really quickly. Okay. So what are they looking for? What do they call the things that they're looking for? What's the terminology they're using? Are they specifying? Do they need a PhD, or do they not know what a PhD could offer them, or are they open to a PhD? So it depends on how amenable or how informed they are in the first place as to how you would pitch that. Now, as you can guess, you couldn't possibly know that unless you talk to them first. So this is usually my very, very first tip of the day. Where in a job ad, they've given a name and a number, particularly if it's the hiring manager, there's a reason they do that. They expect you to do it. And if you don't, you will be at a disadvantage compared to everybody who does. Can I have a really honest show of hands? Who's ever done that before? There's a name and a number. I'll ring them and find out some more about the role. We have the fabulous Josephine with her hand up, and I think you're it, Josephine. Don't feel bad, the rest of you, because that's kind of typical. So most people don't call. Now, here's the thing. If all of you in this workshop were applying for the same role, have a think about that. If you're all applying for the same role, now, Josephine will ring. Roxanne might. So best case scenario is this recruiter is going to have 2 phone calls. In that phone call, those 2 callers can ask all manner of things to give them a better understanding of how to complete the job application in the most tailored, the most relevant way for their business needs. So it's not going to be particularly surprising to you, perhaps, that if they're going to shortlist 4 people, I can almost guarantee 2 of those 4. And it's going to be those 2 people who rang first. So if you can afford to risk being one of the other 2, don't worry about it. But if you can't afford that and you want to be as close to, I have literally done everything I can to make myself look attractive for this role, then my suggestion is do some due diligence before you write so that they can give you the hints that they need. I'm going to tell you more about that in next year's workshop. So, I mean, lots of different things. One of the questions that I always tend to ask is, I'm interested to know how this role came about. Because you'll get all kinds of answers and you'll hear from their body language, from the, well, we've just had somebody decide they'd like to work somewhere else. Now, if you get that, you already know they're stressed. This was not expected. They're a little bit peeved off with the person who's leaving. So you have the opportunity to essentially go, so tell me about the role. If I was successful in the role, what would you want me to do differently than the way it's currently done? Pretty handy, isn't it? If they say, oh, the role's come about because the person in the role has been promoted to another role within our company, you've learned a few things. One, they promote from within. Yay! Do they sound like the kind of culture you might like to work with? Well, probably, because they're willing to promote their own. So that's good to know. That tells you a little bit about the office culture. The other thing then is you can hear that they're regretful, even though that they're happy that the person's been promoted. They're going to miss them because they were great. So then your question is, so tell me what you're going to miss about that person, and what would you like the new person to do the same? So you're giving them the opportunity to either say what you don't want to happen or what you do want to happen in the role before you get them to interview. Now, if you happen to weave that through your selection criteria or your cover letter and say, this is my usual approach and this is what you get when you had me, and I do those sorts of things, what do you think? Are you going to look like you're going to fit? Because that's what it's all about. It's about determining fit. So there's an awful lot of things that you can find out by just, is the role new? Now, if it's new, you already know that it's going to be a bit of a fly by the seat of your pants if you were going to get the role. So things that they would be really keen for you to have skills in is flexibility, initiative, autonomy, you know, that you don't need everything clarified first. If you're the kind of person that can just roll with it, if it's a brand new role, they probably haven't worked it all out yet. If you're not that kind of person, it doesn't mean you can't apply for the role, but in terms of fit, you can see how just asking a couple of probing questions up front will give you a bit of a context of where to pitch your application. So, going through quickly. Now, I am speaking to the imposters in the room. There is scientific evidence that this is a gender difference, but it is also a personality difference. So, women, and in this case, I am, target market. I am one of these people. This is my personality. I'd be 16% less likely to apply for a job after viewing it because I don't necessarily meet 100% of the criteria. And I go, oh, nearly. I've just got to work on this, this, and this, and next time I can apply. Well, others are going to apply. Close enough is good enough. So again, it's good to know that there are differences in personality, in preferences, and potentially in gender because of that imposter syndrome and because of I don't feel confident that I could start potentially at this level. My suggestion is find some experiments that you would like to apply for before you are ready to look for a role, because, in the same way that you don't ride a mountain bike when you're 4 years old and learning to ride a push bike, you can't do cross country first thing. If you haven't done applications before, or you haven't done them for a while, you might not nail the first one. So experiment first with a role that it doesn't matter if you nail it or not, because then it's a learning curve and you will improve exponentially when it counts. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to talk more about in the next workshop. So please follow the instructions. You would be amazed. I worked in recruitment for quite some time in an HR role. The number of people that didn't submit a selection criteria document and just sent a resume is staggering. The frustration is when you would look at the resume and you go, man, I'd have liked to have seen their selection criteria because they sound like they could have been a good fit. But if I've asked you for something and you haven't given it to me, well, it's a little bit like an assessment, isn't it? If you don't hand in part B of the assessment, they're not going to grade it. So it's really unlikely that you will be shortlisted. So my suggestion is start with a master document. It's a bit overwhelming at the beginning because we want to throw the whole kitchen sink at everything, but start with a master document and then you don't have to rewrite it every time. But the point of a master document is that you cut and paste only the relevant pieces into your actual application. So you don't have to write a new document every time, but you do have to tweak it, cut, paste, modify, change your language, use different terminology every single time. Otherwise, it looks like a bog standard, dear sir, can I have a job? And that's not what's going to get you there. So, can I get a really quick show of hands who understands what I mean when I talk about the STAR model or the CAR model? Have you heard of this one before? Show of hands. Maybe you can't find your hands on. Oh, there you go, Olivia. Thank you. There's a couple of you. Right. So maybe you've heard of STAR, but you haven't heard of CAR. It's actually pretty similar. STARS is situation, task, action, result. And then CAR is abbreviated context, action, result. So the way I describe that is those of you who've met me a few times before, I'm an oversharer, right? I like words. I use too many words. So for me, I'm trying to make my answers in the selection criteria as short as possible. Otherwise, I just drone on. So to be short, context, action, results. I don't lose track and I don't end up forgetting what the point of my story was with too many categories. If you are the opposite to me and you are an undersharer and you tend to answer too briefly and it's a bit of a tooth extraction for people to get more information from you, if you know that's your standard, I'm no happier with my standards, so there's no good way around this. But if you know you're an undersharer, use the STAR model because it'll help stretch that out. So it's the situation. This was the situation that I was in. This is the story I'm going to tell. This is the task we were required to do. These are the action steps that I took to change what was happening. The result is what tangible outcome came of it. And then I usually put a star L actually, which is a learning at the end. So it could be a double R for reflection. It could be an L for learning. And quite honestly, I've even forgotten what the S could stand for, but you get the idea. Situation, task, action, result, learning. So that's for those of you who find it hard to volunteer more information. If you answer all 5 of those things, either in an interview or in a selection criteria example, you will have some meat in your application, which is excellent. All right, so this is a very busy slide, and I do apologize, but there's a lot for you to know. Okay, there's a lot. Yeah, Jess, you're an oversharer. I am too. So I use the CAR model, which is context. It's faster. We've just mushed situation and task, context, action, result. And I don't usually talk about the learning because I use too many words. So context, 1 sentence. Action, 1 sentence. Result, 1 sentence. It's about limiting yourself to the essentials. Okay, so this is, if you only pin 1 slide from this deck to your pinboard in your study, it's this one. This is literally everything you need to know about the difference between an academic CV or a professional resume. Now, I use those terminologies. Often you don't hear the word professional resume. I'm just trying to differentiate it. In other words, it's an industry resume. So it's either academic. If it's academic, it's always a CV. If it's not academic, it's never a CV. It's always a professional resume, even though recruiters might use the terminology interchangeably. What you need to know is what the differences are in using these terms that I'm teaching you, and you use the right one. So here we go. Let's start with academic. Up the top, the academic CV, and I used the analogy before, this is everything and the kitchen sink. So this is detail of your teaching experience, your research experience, your research projects, your thesis, the whole shebang. There is no page limit for an academic CV. So if you're applying for an academic role, you do not have to be brief. How delightful. Unless you choose to be. It doesn't mean it can't be short. It just means that you don't have to cull things because it's taking too long. The reason that it's long is because you have a lot to say, right? So begin with your research hyperlink is always a great idea. Your ORCID profile, your UX research portfolio, QUT ePrints, wherever your stuff is, and it's combined into an e-portfolio essentially, use that as a link in the beginning. You would then talk about your key skills. So any of, well, the advantages, your extras, your nice to haves. This could be scholarships. This could be grants that you've achieved. This could be service awards, community of practice that you are involved in, clubs, societies, partnerships, collaborations, again, the whole shebang, because all of that is going to be interesting. Then we talk about your education. And again, this could be a page, right? Because there's a lot to say again. This is all your tertiary qualifications, including your GPA. Now, I say that on the assumption that you want to boast about your GPA. So in other words, if it's a selling feature, add it on. If it's not though, because you were juggling, you know, 10 other things, part-time work, maybe full-time work, and, you know, life stuff, and your GPA was a pass, but it wasn't particularly dramatic, that's cool, just leave it off. If it's not going to go, just leave it off. Then we talk about your relevant experience. And that means basically teaching and research experiences that you've had. Tutoring, sessional tutoring, even high school tutoring, any teaching roles, any coaching roles, any mentoring roles, anything that adds to your bag of tricks, your suite of skills as an academic. So remember, as an academic, you work across 4 domains. It's leadership, teaching, research, and the one that often gets forgotten is administration. That's not particularly exciting, but we can't forget that that's a huge section of it. Christina, did you have a question?
Hi, Karen, how are you?
Hello.
I do have a bit of a question. So for somebody that's coming from a fairly extensive experience in industry, so I worked as a in private practice in law for a reasonable amount of time.
Wow. Okay.
And then I've come into doing a PhD. I'm just sort of wondering how you would refer to that, like, substantial body of experience in an academic CV. It seems ridiculous unusual to leave it off altogether.
Completely, you would not leave it off.
Yeah, not and obviously a lot of those skills, you know, have some relevance in certain types of roles as well. But yeah, yes, just your thoughts on that. That'd be great.
We are not throwing out any previous identities in order to build a new one as an academic. Everything that has gone before is valuable. That's one of the reasons that I love the idea of the academic CV for academic roles, because it is the kitchen sink. You do talk about this. What I would do, and it's the perfect time to ask, Christina, so thank you. It's quite unusual, actually. Hopefully it will become more usual, but it's quite unusual for people to have an extensive amount of experience in industry and then move into academia. So it doesn't come up much, but you are not the only one in this session. So I'm really glad you asked. It means that you can kind of pick and choose a little bit from both sections. The points, so the first things would be exactly the same: research hyperlink, key skills, education, relevant employment. What I would actually do for you and for others who've had a lot of industry work, I would essentially have 2 distinct employment sections. Rather than just have previous roles or employment history and then just have it reverse chronological as we always do, I would split them up. And I would split them into, now it might be an either or, it could be research and teaching experience, or it might just be one or other of those. It could just be research experience, or it might just be teaching experience. but I would raise that to earlier in the CV, if you can, any experience that directly relates to research or teaching. If you don't have any yet, that's okay. Don't leave an empty section. Just move straight into your next section, which would be employment history. So you would use your employment history exactly as you would for a normal, not that academic roles are abnormal, but you would write your employment history as you normally would, targeting the key skills or tasks that are the closest crossovers, yeah? So if you had both, so if you've got no previous industry or none to speak of experience, you would go relevant employment and then list your tutoring and your sessional work and then move on. If you don't have industry. If you only have industry, but no teaching or research employment, then your section would be employment history, and you would just do a reverse chronological idea of what your previous roles were. If you have both, my suggestion would be it is probably beneficial for you to split those so that your teaching and research roles and then professional roles is how I would frame that. So teaching and research roles, or teaching and research employment history, and then professional employment history. And then you write as much and as fabulously as you always would about your previous careers in consulting, in law, in teaching, whatever that may be. Does that help, Christina?
Yeah, that's great, because I've done a couple of practice sort of academic CVs, and it seems a bit weird not to mention it at all.
Utterly weird.
But yeah, sort of within that structure, knowing how to work it in. So yeah, thank you.
It's good. I'm so glad you've raised it, because for those of you with industry experience, please don't hear that, oh, that's suddenly not relevant and we only care about teaching and research. We don't. It's just that a lot of you who are going through to academic roles don't have anything else to speak to. So it's okay if you don't, but if you do, always highlight it and draw really clear connections with why that's a good thing. There's an enormous set of reasons why industry connections, industry engagements, industry familiarity would be super useful for your students. You don't want to be in a situation where you're teaching at a Sandstone and you've been there for 70 years, and the last time you were in an industry setting was literally half a century ago. How much are you really going to add to your classrooms if you can't bring what's new in the industry, what's happening, what's the current news, who are the connections, and bring that into the classroom? So if Christina, if you have prior experience in law, and then you are looking to become a law academic, of course, your previous legal history is extraordinarily relevant. But they're going to want to see your teaching first, if you have any. Then publications. So we'll get back onto this. So publications, everything in reverse chronological order. And if there's a lot to say, consider chunking it up so it's just a little bit easy to read and easy to follow. So it could be, these are book chapters that I've contributed to, these are peer-reviewed journals, these are other journals, these are the, your A1 journals, those sorts of things, whatever it means. So I've suggested here can be more than 8 pages. I've seen a 14-page academic resume. Academic CV, and they certainly got the job. So it's everything you've contributed inside the world of academia and anywhere else that is also relevant to your future role as an academic. Okay. Are you with me so far? Overwhelmed? So what's the difference between that and a professional resume? Well, we leave the kitchen sink in the kitchen pretty much. With this document, it's not, this is everything I've done. This is cherry picking. These are the best things that demonstrate my suitability for the gap that you're trying to fill with your role. And that means you're going to have to tailor that a lot. It means you're going to have to be super concise. Ideally, 2 pages. I feel a bit of a fraud because mine's 3. So I'll let you have a 3-page resume when you're as old and as boring as I am. But if you can do it as a 2-page resume, that is fantastic. So what's different? You start with your LinkedIn hyperlink, because for industry, they care very, very much that you are on LinkedIn, connected to LinkedIn, and that they can check you out first on a professional social media platform so that they can get a sense of who you are and what you're all about. So, quick tip, make sure you've got a LinkedIn profile. If you're open to industry roles, make sure you're active. I have 2 workshops that I run on LinkedIn, so there's lots and lots of information for you to find, but it's a fabulous resource. Find me on LinkedIn, practice with me if you like. So, you've got your LinkedIn hyperlink. You'd have your email address and your phone number. Addresses aren't relevant unless they are part of your sales kit. If you are applying for a role next to the organisation, that's an advantage. Say, I'm a local, I'm right next door. Unless you're a local, don't let them make any decisions on how far you would choose to commute or not. It's happened to me a few times. I always leave it out. If I'm forced to, with the software that they make you fill in, I find my nearest friend or relative who is next door to the role, and I put my address care of them. Care of, they don't know any different. I used to live on the Sunshine Coast. When quite north on the Sunshine Coast, I was applying for a job at UQ, which is a pain to get to from the Sunshine Coast. It took me nearly 2 hours each way. I knew that that was going to be a drawback for me. So they didn't need to know that. My father-in-law lives at Kenmore, so I put my address, care of Kenmore. And for the first year that I worked there, they didn't know I didn't live at Kenmore. It's not their business how you get to work or not. As long as you do and you're on time, it's not their business. Don't give them any information that might disqualify you because of reasons that aren't as important to you, if that makes sense. So then I would write my professional summary. This is 3 lines: who I am, what I can do, and what I will bring to the role. So what I'm looking for. 3 lines, that's all. But who I am can be really quite a complicated thing to talk about, can't it? Who am I? Oh, I don't know. How do you describe yourself? So can I suggest you are not a PhD student? You are not even a PhD graduate. This is not because that's not to be celebrated, but you are so much more than your PhD or your PhD thesis. So let's come up with an umbrella concept that covers everything you've ever done. So for Christina, previous lawyer. So that's how I would start. I am a qualified, certified, however that works, lawyer with 15 years experience. So that's who I am. What can I do? Then you would list some of the things that you are most passionate about and capable of, that you will be asked to do in your new role. So something, if I was doing that, this would be, with a background in HR, training, recruitment, and student service provision across the last 2 decades. I bring a passion for student success to everything I do. And then what will you bring? It's like, I thrive, or what are you looking for? I thrive in environments where there is a supportive team with autonomous work available. I like to work in collegial silos. So whatever works for you, that's what you'd say there. Whatever the job is requiring, as long as it's not a lie or a stretch for you to say, yeah, that's what I like. What you're trying to do is, in the first 3 lines on your resume, you're trying to say, well, look at me, I will fit so well in your organization. Now, if you don't know what fit would be, that's why you do your pre-call, to find out a little bit more of what kind of a culture, what kind of an organization are you, what are you looking for in terms of fit. Then we talk about education and training, but way abbreviated. So in the academic one, you're going to be talking about specializations, you're going to be talking about research projects, you're going to be talking about research questions and methodologies and the whole shebang, and whether this is by publication or by dissertation, all kinds of detail, because that's relevant for an academic CV. For an industry one, they don't even know what those words mean, and it's going to scare the pants off them if you tell them. So you are going to look overqualified and scary if you give them that kind of detail. So tell them what your quals are and move on, because that speaks enough to what you can do. I have a bachelor's in this, a master's in this, a PhD, about to complete a PhD in, that's all you need, none of the other detail. Then your key skills, essentially you are reading the job ad, repeating their key skills back to them, and then giving examples of how you can do that. And then your employment history, about 2 pages. Do I have some internationals in the room at the moment? I'm going to have a quick word about referees. So I'm assuming you know what an employment referee is. This is a person that they're going to call to say, so what's Karen really like to work with? So for the internationals in the room, you must write your referees on your resume. You must write their name, their job title, if it's not clear why they are your referee, so previous supervisor, current thesis project coordinator, whatever it is, and their phone number. If you do not write that on, this is utterly unfair, but I'm going to say it because I want you to know. If you don't have it on there, there is always a risk that the recruiter will assume you don't have any. And that's where it's different for domestics versus internationals. If I wrote referees available on request, I'd probably get away with it. No one's going to go, oh no, she's got no referees. They might still be annoyed at me because I'm going to make them call me, Karen, could I have your referees? And I'll go, sure, I'll email that to you as soon as I'm off the bus. So then they have to wait for me to do that. Then they've got to do all this chasing around. If all else is equal and one person has a referee set and the other one doesn't, they're going to go with the one that makes it easy all the time. They won't call the referee before they have your permission. But it's easy to go SMS me, Karen, do I have your permission to call a referee? Yes, whether I'm on the bus or not. So for internationals, really, it's more important than for locals, but put them on so that there's no disadvantage.
What
If
about
you don't-
reference letters?
Yeah, it's a good question,
Mm,
but in Australia, we don't use them. Here's the thing, because it's a lot like asking your mum. If you asked my mum, what's Karen like to work, what's Karen like? And she knows it's important. She's going to write something beautiful. Karen's fabulous. She's lovely. And they might not tell them anything about how feral I am at 4 a.m. when I got home in a disheveled state, or what I'm like when I'm having a temper tantrum. And that's kind of the point. The referee call is always, first of all, can we confirm that this person is who they say they are? So if they say they worked with you, can I just hear you say that they did for those dates? Now I want to know, what didn't Karen tell me in her application? So Karen's put all this beautiful spin on it and sounds terrific, but what's the ugly truth? What she really liked to work with? And they will ask. They won't ask probably in that way, but they'll say, what are her growth areas? What were the areas that you think she needs to develop in? And really what they're asking for is, please tell me if there's any red flags. And then you may say, well, I'm surprised she put me as a referee, actually, because we did sack her. And watch that job say goodbye. So that's why referee conversations are so critical. But referee statements in writing are a little bit useless, because it's just the sugar-coated version, the glossy version, all the good news, none of the bad. The point of a referee call is that they want to know both. Now, hopefully, if your referee is working for you, there won't be anything major red flag anyway. They might just go, look, if I had to say something, I think at the end she was a little bit overqualified for the task that she was doing, and we struggled to keep her interested, but she honoured her contract and we can't fault her for that. What an awesome thing to say as a negative. But with a written referee statement, there's no opportunity to do that. How do we know you didn't write it yourself? And that's why, unfortunately, they're not usually worth the paper that they're written on in Australia. So I would leave them out, because if you include it anyway, they will assume you don't know how it works around here, and there will be other things that stand out that don't look right. So you will be in the probably not pile. So do everything that they expect from a local Australian and make your resume local Australian. So no photos, no personal details, no date of birth, none of that. We don't do that. Ironically, we do photos on LinkedIn. It is inconsistent. It makes no sense, but it is what it is. Please put a photo on your LinkedIn. Please never put a photo on your resume. All right, that's a lot of content. There is more that we could unpack, but are you kind of comfortable that you see the difference between those two? Everybody's okay with the difference between an academic CV, professional resume? Any other questions before we move on? Awesome. I just want to make sure that we've got enough time to spend time on our cover letters, because I know that was important to you. So where's my mouse gone? Right. I'm going to speed through these because these are things that you can just read later. For your resume, content and white space is important. So I've given you some headings. There is not one single way to do a resume, but these headings do work. One thing I will tell you is, please don't use tables in your resume. because the computer software, who is also often the first person to read your resume, they can't read them. It turns it into gobbledygook windings, and you might have the best resume ever, but if they can't read it, you can't be shortlisted. So again, this is a super quick check, is use the keywords in the ads. Make sure you know what the terminology is for the industry that you're working in. So for example, in my role, I talk about students. I've worked at universities for 15 years. I've always talked about students. I'm trying to get out of that habit, because in GRED, we talk about HDRs and ECRs. You're beyond students now. So I try not to use student vocabulary, because to me, that sounds undergraduate, and that's not who you are. So in the same way, in business, they won't talk about participants, they won't talk about students, they won't talk about lecturers. They might talk about clients, stakeholders, those kinds of terminologies. It could be anything. It could be really obvious, or it might be a little bit subtle, but if you use the wrong terminology, it's not going to be an instant dismissal into the no pile, but it doesn't help sell the fact that you will fit like a glove in this role when you get there. So if you find out what terminology they use, a lot of it should be in the job ad. If not, go onto LinkedIn and do a search of everyone that you can find with the job title that you are applying for, and read their about sections, so that you'll get a feel for how they talk about their industry and their role. Okay. Your resume must be tailored. It sounds really simple, but most people don't do it. And it's really clear that you just use this bog standard resume for any kind of role that you're applying for. And it's a little bit like, you know, during the election, if we can go back to remembering that, and your mailbox gets flooded with flyers from political candidates. How do they address them? To the householder. Have you ever read them? Well, maybe if you're interested in politics, you do. I make a point, unless something's addressed to me, I never read it. If it's to the householder, if you don't even know who I am living here, you've got nothing interesting to say. You've got nothing relevant to me. So I just throw that in the bin. So make sure that your resume is tailored, because otherwise it's the same as, here's a flyer that I've sent to the whole of Brisbane to the householder. You don't care about me, so I don't care about you. Same with your cover letter. Make sure you address it to a person's name, if at all possible. If they've made it unbelievably impossible for you to find out who it is, at least use their job title. Otherwise, dear sir, madam, or dear recruiter is exactly like to the householder, and guess where I'll put it? Same place. So the focus for an academic CV is obvious. It's on classes that you teach, how many, how senior, and how many publications you have, and how fancy they are. An industry resume, honestly, doesn't care about either of those things. And it's not because the skills are not important, it's just that they have no context for that. It doesn't mean anything to them. Industry cares about outputs and outcomes. They want to know what you did that made a difference. They want to know what you completed, and was it on time, under budget, and successful, and how did you measure that? So anything you talk about on your industry resume, we need metrics, we need data. Researchers are pretty good with data, right? So how do you measure this? You must talk to outcomes that mean something to your future employer. And if you can't tell that from the job role, an informational interview with somebody who's already doing that kind of role will help you out with that. Or that may be something that you can flesh out in your pre-phone call before you apply. Okay. 2 to 4 pages, maximize white space. Please don't switch fonts and size and all of that kind of thing. Just make it look professional. So, does anyone have a role that they would like to share? Just the role at this point that you'd be willing to share so that we can use that as an example. No volunteers. Okay. Well, then I'm going to do. I'm just trying to exit out of my presentation and go into a window. Now, where would we look for an academic role? If we're looking at academic roles, where might we look? I can't type. Oh, good. And you're not watching me, which is wonderful. I was worried I was sharing my screen. Right. Now that I've typed it, come on, move it over. Right. Can you still see my screen? All right. This is Times Higher Education uni jobs. If you Google uni jobs, it will get you here. What this does is enables you to search on academic posts, research roles, senior management roles, and then professional roles. So you can do academic, research, and professional in the one site, which is pretty awesome. You can also search on location, which is also pretty awesome if you have to be limited. So I want to look at academic roles, right? So we have got worldwide options coming up. So we've got Trondheim, Hong Kong, China, Guangdong, all kinds. This is interesting. I wonder. Tell you what, Associate Professor in Teacher Education. Let's look at that one, because all of you understand education, even if you're not from the School of Education. Okay, so closing date the 2nd of November. So, are you looking for a role? Do you have significant expertise in initial teacher education in maths or science? Let's pretend you do. Passionate about developing outstanding teachers and future leaders. Okay, we are looking for someone able to maintain a research agenda in teacher education and take responsibility for working with our initial teacher education partners. You will initiate and lead in their area of teaching and research and contribute to the school's strategic direction. Right. What skills have you got that would make you appropriate for this role? And at this point, because this is just an example, let's forget your discipline. Any thoughts on how to unpack this? To get you started. Oh, what did I do with the page? Okay, so to get you started, essentially what we're going to do is go through and find out what are the key words here, because this is how we do things. So it would be maintaining a research agenda. You've got an idea of what that might be. What skills would you have to equip you to maintain a research agenda? So if you were looking at this role, you would literally just highlight all of these things and then you would speak to them. So you would then take responsibility. So commitment to working with our education partners. So the first thing is the internal research agenda inside your department. So this is working with colleagues and other academics. Next, they're looking for the ability to liaise and develop relationships with external stakeholders. In this case, Red Kite Learning Trust. So what kinds of skills and abilities would you need to be able to demonstrate? They're completely different, right? Maintaining a research agenda and then committing to work with our external partners, really different. Then it talks about initiate and lead in their area of teaching and research. So they put 2 words in that, so you need to address both, teaching and leadership. So what are some examples that you could think of that would relate to this? Then they talk about the school, which is great. But in terms of you, so they then say, and we welcome diverse people. It's really interesting to see how they phrase those sorts of things in the UK. Language like that, Black, Asian, ethnically diverse people, people who identify as LGBTQ and disabled people. In Australia, we wouldn't use terminology like that. So it's really interesting. Again, we are learning that the terminology, the vocab in different environments is different. So you just need to learn how this works. Okay. That's how you unpack a job ad. We're not going to do the whole lot because we'll go down a rabbit hole, but that's how specific you need to be. So you already know what issues you would be referring to in your cover letter and in your key skills in your academic CV. Okay. I want to get to the next section. Selection criteria. All right. So let's unpack your selection criteria. Does anyone need a coffee, glass of water, stretch your legs? We've been here for a while, haven't we? But we've got to get this done. So feel free to come back if you need to. So what is it about selection criteria that matters? So, there's the S. Right, I'm glad I reminded myself it's self-reflection, which is another way of saying learning. So this is what I tried. This is what I achieved. Would I do it the same way next time? Maybe, maybe not. So would anyone like to share, be brave enough to share a selection criteria that they struggle to write? Is there one that keeps recurring that you go, oh, I hate this question, how do I answer that? Or have you written one before and you go, I don't love it, but I don't know how to fix it? No, there's not a single criteria that you struggle with?
Can I say something?
Of course you can. Who is this?
It's Amina.
Hello, Amina. Sorry, I couldn't see who was speaking. Hi, Amina. What would you like to add?
I find it difficult to tell about the communication skills and the ability to demonstrate teamwork and collaboration, because we just finished PhD and we work with supervisors, but if we mention too much about supervisors with working collaboratively, so it feels a bit difficult for me to express that. Yeah, because we are still learning and we are still looking for the funding and everything, and we have no experience for that, but they expect us
Ah.
for.
All right, let's focus then on the teamwork and collaboration, because that is a common one. So during your undergrad, there was probably far more teamwork and collaboration than you ever really wanted. Who's had a team assignment where you're the only one that did any work? Yeah. So there's collaboration, but it might not have been ideal. But for the last little while, it's kind of a solo effort, isn't it? You do have a team around you, but it is pretty much a solo effort in terms of teamwork and collaboration to get your thesis done. So, does anyone have any thoughts? It can be tough, huh? So, the perfect world answer, which may not be your reality, and I acknowledge that. So I'll give you two different answers. The perfect world answer is to remind you that, again, your PhD is not the only thing that you have been doing, I hope, for the last few years. So even though your research in itself may have been kind of head down, bum up all by yourself, there is teamwork and collaboration in other areas. It may be that you've written a paper with other researchers. It may be that you've done a team teaching kind of option, or you've filled in for a colleague just for a session or two, and that required a bit of collaboration and teamwork. It may be that you've worked on projects that weren't even specifically research projects, but they just came up because your supervisor, why does that keep clicking? Sorry. So it might just be that your supervisor said, hey, would anyone like to contribute to this? Maybe you're involved in an HDR society and you're on the executive committee. You're on a research committee. You're a student representative. What else do you do, either at university or outside of university, that requires teamwork? You might be knee deep in your PhD, but you still play mixed netball every Thursday night. That's a teamwork example. If that's where we have to go to get the best example, my suggestion is always go to the best example. Ideally, if you've got a work example, then a study example, then an outside of that context example, in a perfect world, but we don't live perfect lives. So if all you've got is, I also play social netball, then use that one. Because here's what that tells me. One, you have a life outside of your PhD. Yay. Your employer is going to want to know that too. It tells them that you can enjoy yourself, look after yourself, and work with other people in a completely different scenario than potentially the one that you've been working on at work, which is in your research. So that can be a really terrific story. My question, I guess, so this is perfect world. You've got a work example, part-time role, a previous role that you've held, an industry role that you've come from, that if that is still your best example, then use that. It doesn't matter if it's not in the exact context you were hoping it to be. It's great when you've got lots of different stories and you can pull the most appropriate one, but if you can't, just pull the best story to give yourself the best example. When I was working with undergrad students, it was something that they struggled with a lot. So in the world of undergrad, everything is about assessment, and the only group activities they would ever speak about were group assignments. And so working in recruitment, in grad recruitment, oh dear Lord, it was so boring. Bless them. They've got to use what they've got, but I reckon I've heard the group assignment story told about 1,000 different ways, and it's the exact same story, and it's kind of boring, and it doesn't really tell us much, because first of all, we know that's a group that you didn't choose to be in. Second of all, you've got some really specific outcomes, and at the end of the day, if other people aren't going to help you, you're just going to muck in and do it yourself. A better way to differentiate yourself. So in graduate recruitment, that one student that gave a different example of when they were working part-time as a student concierge in HiQ, and they gave an example about collaboration and group work with that work team while they were a casual. I've got to be honest, they got the job. It was just so refreshing to hear a different story. So whatever you tell, make sure that your story is worth telling. And if you have to jump a little bit sideways to find a good story, then do that. So your collaboration story might be from your children having to do fancy dress for book week, or it could be that you volunteer at a community centre every Saturday morning to help new arrivals with language, and you coach them in English. It doesn't matter what it is. The point is, what are you trying to say about your collaboration and teamwork? Let's make sure that the point you are making is well made. Because if you don't have a great story, it's like, well, I don't have a lot of teamwork stories. Yeah, I guess it's just my supervisor and me. It's like, oh, okay. What that tells me is you're an unknown. You may not have teamwork skills. If it was as confronting as that, it's like, unless you give me a good story, I don't know if you've got any skills. What story would you tell me to reassure me, of course I've got great teamwork skills? What would that be? I know that doesn't give you an answer, Amina, but does that give you an idea of why it's important?
Thank you, it's helpful. Thank you.
So importantly, for those of you who are at the earlier end of your research, be aware of these kinds of questions that are coming out. If you don't have any answers to that, you've got time to broaden your experience base, to volunteer somewhere. It doesn't have to be for long. You know, it could just be for the fun run in the park every week for a month. Whatever gap you have in your stories, think of a way to fill it and then go do that in the shortest period possible that will still give you a good enough story. Okay, right. So here's an example. Look, how about that? It's a little bit teamwork and collaboration, but it's actually focused on the external collaboration. So goodness, I've written answers to this about 100 times in roles that I've got and haven't got. So demonstrated ability to collaborate and foster mutually beneficial partnerships. How do we answer that? So remember, using the STAR principle, here's what it would look like. This is color coded. So while working as a research assistant at QUT, situation. That's all you need to say. It's really tempting, especially with an oversharer, to give the whole context and story. Really doesn't matter, as brief as possible. I was a research assistant. That's all they need to know. Here's the task. I was required to build partnerships and relationships with university staff and industry partners in order to enhance research efficiency and outcomes. So, situation, task. Here comes my action. My approach was to now make sure that this is yours. You own this, you do this. It's not the we as a group, we decided, because otherwise that might just mean someone else had a great idea and you just sat there. So it's about what you can bring. So my approach was to maintain regular communication via a fortnightly update to our industry partners to ensure that they were informed of progress. Situation, task, action. The result was that our industry partners remained actively engaged in the research and identified further ways that they could contribute. Now, here's my self-reflection. On reflection, the fortnightly update could have been extended to a monthly update, highlighting key facts and reducing email overload. But that depends on the scenario. It may be that on reflection or after seeking feedback, I discovered that they preferred weekly communication, that they wanted a weekly phone call as well as a fortnightly email, whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? The point is, what am I demonstrating? I've demonstrated the ability to collaborate and foster relationships. So you don't have to give every single time you've ever done it, or 10 different examples. I've done it here and it looked like this, then I've done it here and it looked like this. It's essentially one example. I understand. Oh, I'm sorry. Siri doesn't understand. What you're trying to do is come up with one example for each criteria. This is my criteria. In a perfect world, if you've got enough space, as long as they haven't limited the word count or anything, you'd write the full criteria. You'd put selection criteria responses, point 1, and then you'd write out the whole criteria. Then you'd write your response. You wouldn't color code it, but you would answer all of those issues. Is it easier to understand how to unpack these sorts of things when you see examples written out? Any feedback, any responses from this example so far? Comfortable? We'll continue. All right. So to give you an idea of how to set it out, so you use the criteria as headings with bold and underline. Rough rule of thumb, consider a quarter to a half a page per criteria. If I can confess to you, the very first time I applied for a university professional role, so the very first time I wrote selection criteria, bear in mind that was always my job, so I should have known how to do it. But well, they didn't give me a word limit. It's a dangerous thing not to give me a word limit. So I think I wrote about a page and a half for every criteria. There were 12 criterias. I cannot believe I got an interview that I had seriously expected people to skim through. What's that, 16 pages? How self-absorbed was I? I'm really not that interesting. If you can't say it in half a page, you haven't got the hang of it. So it's one example, around about half a page. If it's a couple lines short or long, it really doesn't matter. But please don't do what I did and do a page and a half. So criteria are weighed. They start with the most important things, which is why, same with a resume, you start with the most important stuff. If they like what they read, then they keep reading. So the critical things that are their non-negotiables you've got to have up the top. So if we're in imposter syndrome and we're not sure if we're qualified for this role, if it's the first couple of criteria you couldn't answer, yeah, you should probably leave it. But if it's criteria 6 that you're going, oh, not really, kind of, throw it in anyway. Because by the time they get to criteria 6, this is their wish list. That's just nice to have. If you ever have criteria that's separated into essential and desirable, you have to answer every criteria, regardless. Set it out the same way they have, so split it into essential and desirable. But again, give it the same kind of attention. So you do your half a page answers for the essentials. If you don't have a lot to say, or it's a little bit of a stretch in the desirable, well, a couple of lines, that'll do. Yeah, I've had some exposure. Here it is. Rather than waxing lyrical about your expertise in that field, if you're sort of going, yeah, I've heard of that, and that's about as much as you can say, that's all right. So give it the weighting that's reflected in their job ad. Really simple thing. Make sure your name and your mobile number is at the top or the bottom of every single page, and number your pages. Just because if they get to the end and they go, oh, this person was excellent, who was this again? And what if your selection criteria has separated from your resume and they can't even remember who it was for? So use a header or a footer. I would usually put selection criteria for the job as my header with my name. And then I would put the page number, 1 of 3, 1 of 4, whatever, and then my mobile number as my footer. So whatever page they're on, as soon as they got impressed, they could ring me. On the assumption that they would. Theory. Okay, so selection criteria are full sentences, not bullet points. So the time for bullet points is resumes and academic CVs. Abbreviate that as much as you can so that you can jam as much gold into a short number of pages. But with selection criteria, the reason they are different from a resume is because they want to see that you can write in sentences. For academic roles in particular, the ability to write coherently and cohesively is pretty important. So they don't want to have to read your thesis draft for a demonstration of that. They just want to read a few pages of selection criteria. Ideally, make it space and a half rather than single line spacing so that it's easy to read. Okay. So if we find a job, shall we find another job? Do you want to spend time doing it? Shall we find an industry role or an academic role, or does anyone want to send through something that they've looked at?
Hi, sorry, Karen.
Hello.
It's Renee, sorry. One of the ones that comes up every time you see an academic role is the ability to get funding from external sources.
Yeah.
I know they use the word ability. They say, have you done it, or what is the ability to do it? I mean, how would you actually answer that? You don't know if you've got the ability unless you've ever done it. But yeah.
Well, actually, when you think about it, obviously, if you have been successful in having achieved that before in a grant scenario, tick. So here is evidence point 1, I've received 2 grants. So clearly I have the ability to secure funding. So that one's an easy one if you've been there before. If you haven't been there before, it's like, I believe I have the capacity to do that. Sure. Really don't know. So I can't prove that. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yes, I suppose so. You know, it just keeps on coming up, and I was just wondering whether there was anything in particular they were looking for. I mean, what would you mention that you've done that would be similar? Would it be saying, oh, well, I've managed to get funding for my studies? That shows the ability to, I don't know, be persuasive. I don't know. You see, I just don't know what it is they're looking for. And when you see people celebrated for the Art Deco awards, you've heard it so hard to get.
Yeah.
What is it that they're actually looking for? Yeah.
Such a good question. So the way you've begun to think about that for yourself is really important. So what is it that they're actually asking for? So is it persuasion? Is it influence? And yes, that is part of it. So what they're asking for is, can you construct a contemporary, relevant financial argument to promote something that needs funding? So other examples that you could potentially use is anytime you've approached an organisation for funding on behalf of your research or on behalf of, again, any social group, any sporting group, any parental responsibilities, chocolate drives, anyone, anything in your life where you've had to mount a campaign that literally had what's the bottom line? This is going to cost me money. The difference with funding is because a lot of us have passion projects. Some of us have even had the blessing to be able to spend 4 years investigating our passion projects in our thesis. What are the real world implications for that? Well, some of them have more real world application than others, right? Some of them it's contributing to, you know, the body of knowledge. And please don't misunderstand. There are no judgments there at all for me. What I'm saying is, where you have a PhD project that potentially may cure COVID, there's a financial implication. How does it cure COVID? Who is that going to make money for, and why would they be interested? How do I loop the pharmaceutical industry into sponsoring something like that? And what do I have to do to speak their language, talk to their budget, time it for their budget, where they've got some to play with, and say, of all the worthy causes that are coming through your door right now, pick mine. So yes, it's persuasive argument, but it's not theoretically persuasive. It is literally, how do you make somebody, you know, dive into their hip pocket and hand over cash for something that they may or may not see a return on? It's kind of you've heard of the frame WIFM, the what's in it for me. It's your ability to speak to that person's what's in it for me. If you tell me why I need to sponsor this, it'll be my name on the jersey. It'll be, you know, this is what my company will get as a result. You have to time that properly, where I've got money to burn, or where it's at the end of the year and everybody's going, quick, use it or lose it. You know, end of November is a little bit like that at universities. Quick, the funding expires, get rid of it. Otherwise we won't get it again. So you have to time it. You need to understand their cycles. You need to understand who the decision makers are. You need to be able to approach the right decision makers with the right arguments. So that's quite compelling. It's not just, hey, Bob, give us some money. You know, this is a bit of a campaign. It's a skill set that is quite unique to that role. It's a little bit like recruitment, but instead of recruiting the right candidate, you're recruiting the cash, which is going to have projects rise or fall. So this is why it's important. But if you haven't done it before, the idea behind the ability to is for you to draw as many parallels as you can to as many of those things as possible. So where you can mount campaigns, and it might have been a clean up the beach campaign, and you've lobbied the local government to help you out with something or to make an event or something like that. You've been able to identify the key stakeholders, the decision makers. You've been able to compel them with, it's going to look bad for you if you don't. It's going to look great for you if you do. These are the confirmed outcomes that will enhance your business reputation if you pay me some money. And then I'll go and do the grunt work. And then you meet your commitments along those lines. So it might be a series of much smaller examples, but that's how big the question is, which is why if you have been successful, gosh, it's easier, isn't it? You can just go, say, here are 3 examples, but you would still then go situation, task, action, result. So how hard was it? What did you do? Why did it have to be you that was going to secure that funding and not anybody would have had it? You know, because they were just standing there with their wallets open going, you get a grant and you'll get a grant. It probably isn't that. So why was it yours and not someone else's? Did you have to pitch for it? It's all the politicking of it. Which again, gives you an idea of how to talk around it, but not specifically answer that. But does that help you?
That does, because I wasn't actually quite sure what it was that they were actually wanting from that role, because if you've never done it, and I would imagine a lot of people that are just starting out might not have done it. So to answer it was kind of, oh, I'm not sure what they want. And like you say, yes, I have the ability to do most things, whether I can or can't, until I get there is something that no one will ever know. So at least now we understand, okay, it's the timing, who do you, it's the ability to be able to seek the right people out at the right time and give them the information they want so that they can give you money, pretty much in a nutshell. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
it's a really good example of one of those probably nice to haves. The desired criteria, not the essential. Does it mean that you can't be an academic if you haven't done that? Well, you'd be an excellent teacher. You'd be an excellent student supervisor. You'd be an excellent researcher, regardless of that. But, at the end of the day, university funding is pretty thin on the ground. We really need more academics who can pull some money in, who can enhance our institutional reputation, whichever institute we're talking about. They're necessary. And the industry links would be critical. So, for example, one way to half answer that would be potentially to say, this is my approach that I would do. So I would need this, I would need this, and I would need this. I'd need to identify this, this, and this. So if you could at least talk to, here's how I'd go about it. You're talking to, I know that that's the skill you're looking for. And because I can identify that skill, I'm halfway there. That's one of those things. The other thing that you could do is where you potentially, now, I mean, if you've had supervisors who've applied for stuff, get them to give you some tips on how it's done. You could then come up with a local example where you'd say, I would apply the same principles as, or you could speak specifically just to your skills and your strengths, where you could say, throughout my study, my previous work roles, I take on OH&S coordinator, those kinds of things. I am known as the person who knows people. I am known as the connector. What you could do is say, actually, no, I've never asked anybody for money, but I tell you what, I've got 1,000 connections on LinkedIn, and 800 of them are really targeted and specific to this industry. So I've never done it, but I've got a heck of a network that I could give it a shot with. So you could skin that cat a number of different ways, depending on what strength you can bring to the table. That's the type of question where imposter syndrome might stop you from applying because you've never done it. Apply anyway, but give them as much as you can of value. So here's where I've done it locally. Here is where I've seen other people do it, and these are the steps they took. Or I would leverage the heck out of my network because it's amazing. And your network is worth credit too. Does that? Okay. A little bit on cover letters. Again, this is going to be a super quick. I tend to break it down into paragraphs because otherwise I tend to just throw the kitchen sink at them all over the place. So why are you writing? This is your elevator pitch, 1 sentence. You wouldn't use these terms, but essentially, I'm a perfect fit for this role because, or I was so excited to find this role because I've been waiting for this one, and this is why. Why you is the first paragraph. Second paragraph is what are those really necessary skills that you've already got that they've asked for? So, minimum of PhD, tick, got that. So your educational and your technical skills that fit what they've asked for. Paragraph 3, you talk about your previous roles and your skills fit, potentially your softer skills, which are the harder ones, to be honest. So the way you get things done is also a fit. Paragraph 4, this is the one that almost nobody ever writes, but boy, it gets you some brownie points if you do. Here's what I know about the organization, and here's why this is aspirational to me, or this is why this is such a perfect fit. It brings together my previous identity as this, my future identity as that, and in this organization, I have the potential to learn and grow and build to be the exact person that I need to be. Your values are aligned with mine, and be really specific. Choose one and say, it's important to me that I feel a values connection with a future employer. The work that your organization XYZ is doing in the field of X in this location at the moment is really inspirational. Find something that you couldn't find by Googling their organization on the front page of their website. So something that you had to dig for. And then at the end, assume you've got the interview and explain how thrilled you would be to interview for it. And that's basically it. If you follow that format, you will probably find that you write less than if you just wax lyrical. It is not meant to be a repeat of your resume. They can read that, but it's still going to sound like it came from the same person. Okay, here's what I mean by why are you writing. Professor Yartinen is my director. So he's the director of GRED. Dear Professor Yartinen, so again, I know it's to GRED because I know I'm applying for a role in GRED. I know he's the director. So he wasn't on the employment form. He wasn't on the application. But we've researched that, we found out. So dear Professor Yartinen, I'm excited to apply for the currently advertised role of X with ABC. Having completed my PhD in XYZ, this role combines my skills in whatever, my experience in other stuff, and my passion for a third set of things, making me ideally suited for the position. It's a little bit generic, but that's the thing with exemplars, they tend to be. But that's essentially your elevator pitch saying this is why this role is. Here's your template. It can be a little bit different, but mostly your name and your mobile number or your email address, the date, their details, particularly in a large organization, put the position number in bold and the job role, because they might be recruiting for 4 different roles at the same time. And I have had the occasion to where someone was shortlisted for the wrong role. They didn't apply for it, but they were shortlisted for a slightly more junior role, and they didn't realize that they hadn't been shortlisted for the correct one, and recruiters got all confused. A bit awkward. So here are the paragraphs. I look forward to discussing it further. Write your phone number again. There is no reason they can't find your number to ring you for an interview. You don't put your address, because the only thing that they'll mail you is a rejection letter, and you don't want one of them. So you only want them to call you. So just give them your phone number. All right. I think we've pretty much come to the end. So I would love if I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm just going to open it up to some questions while I desperately find my feedback survey that I'd like you to fill out for me. So I know this is good. And what I'm going to do is just cancel the recording now, because you don't need to know this bit. But stay with me, because I'd like to get your feedback. Thanks.